Chapter 36. Clash of the True Runes. Nyoka's stronghold under Mount Amdut, 338 solar year. Come to me. Make me the deity that I was born to be, commanded Nyoka. Both the Twilight and Dawn runes started glowing even brighter than before. The Sun rune, which had been floating in the air above his head, now obeyed his new orders. It descended into Nyoka's forehead. The silver-haired clone started glowing in pure white light for a moment before returning to her normal colors. Yes, the power. Absolute power. Is this how you felt, Father, before you established the kingdom? The ages of knowledge. The power of the sun fills my every pore. The ascension is complete. Once again, I have cheated the grave. The sting of death no longer has any power over me. The unholy dual voices declared with utter glee and jubilation. As the three runes shimmered brightly on the vessel's body, Nyoka declared, "Let me show you what a real heir of the true runes can do, fools. Now, kneel before your new god, worthless mortals." With those words, Nyoka charged up to attack with his true rune. A great sphere of unspeakable force appeared around him. The sphere of energy filled nearly half of the room left still standing. The giant ball looked like an orange mini-sun complete with plasma and solar flares. It was all-consuming and all-powerful. Laszlo couldn't wait any longer. He no longer had a choice. It was now or never. He unleashed his true rune as well. Reaching down deep into his soul, he focused with all his might to turn the rune of punishment's power into a concentrated force of nature to match Nyoka's colossal spell. With his true rune, he had created something like a portal of raw energy that was feeding on all the swirls of purple, red, and green magics spinning around it until the portal was fully charged. The spell looked like something he used to do during the Island War, but only larger. At that point, a beam of red light came firing out of it right at Nyoka's mini-sun attack. The spells from each true rune collided and all hell broke loose around them. Sparks and streams of raw power went flying off in all directions, disintegrating whatever it touched. Powerful gusts of winds and bolts of lightning seemed to be forming out of nowhere. The small party took what cover they could behind a fallen pillar that hadn't been entirely pushed up against the wall. Urge handed Simeon her last two things of mixed herbs, which she had received from Jean before they had all split up days ago. Unlike other herbs that restored a person's physical health, these special herbs restored a person's magical strength. After being exhausted magically from their fight against the half-moon rune, these herbs did just the trick, as both magicians were now back to their own full magical prowess. Each wizard wasted no time in combining their powers to form a barrier to protect their friends. However, even combined at top strength, they both feared how long their shield would last against these two true runes clashing relentlessly like titans. The power being unleashed here bordered on the echelons of the celestial and heavenly, thought Simeon. It was so overwhelming and omnipotent that as a wizard he was fascinated, but as a human he was terrified by it at the same time. Ursh isn't sure how much longer she can do this, yelled a little vessel, very concerned. She continued, "But, Ursh will continue even if it kills her. She will protect her comrades." Simeon nodded in agreement with her sentiment. The corpses of the dead monks and Hido had been evaporated just by the residual power being given off. It occurred to Syra, if not for their shield, they would have probably just been incinerated themselves as well by now. Plus, she could sense the two were slipping under the stress of such unremitting true rune dominance. Syra was no grand wizard like these two or her husband, but she had more than enough runic training as the future queen of Falena to be a formidable opponent. She had promised herself that she and Alinda would leave this place alive. She intended on keeping that promise. She saw Rose shielding Alinda with her own body. Syra, likewise, wanted to protect her. And so, she leaned forward and placed a hand on the shoulder of each magician, who were trying with all their might to keep the protective magical barrier intact. The future queen concentrated like she was going to cast a spell, but she had no rune in her body. Instead, she sent her own energy into the two she was touching. Both magicians felt the new surge of energy and were now able to increase their efforts for the moment. Laszlo could not look back to check on his friends. Any lapse in focus or concentration would mean his defeat and their deaths for sure, he told himself. Thus, he resolved deeper and pressed the rune of punishment for more power. Had his rune been in its old atonement phase, using this much power from it would have killed Laszlo 10 times over by now, he reasoned. The forgiveness phase of his rune was something he never appreciated as much as he did right now. However, that did not matter. While his true rune had more power to give, his own body was spent and exhausted. He couldn't keep this up much longer without it killing him. Even the forgiveness phase of his rune had its limits. Then, as if on cue, both true rune bearers stopped casting and the clashing spells soon fizzled out. Laszlo fell to his knees. Nyoka was, likewise, leaning against his staff for support to hold the clone body upright. Simeon and Urge kept the shield up just in case, but the amount of power they were putting into it went down dramatically to very manageable levels and Syra no longer was helping them either. The dual blade master tried standing up on his feet. Plus, he started to laugh out loud to the surprise of everyone in the room. He declared, "Ha ha ha. I guess you're not so godly, after all. You look just as tired as I am. You are no more powerful than any other true rune bearer I've met." Nyoka countered, "Foolish child, I only stopped because I knew if we generated any more power, we would have destroyed this whole mountain and killed those 2 princesses. I still have plans for them. I need at least one to live long enough to bear me a natural human heir that I may indwell and use my godly powers into their fullest measure. This artificial vessel is great, but not perfect. And I deserve the best. Thus, I need one of them to live." The islander boldly refuted him, "Like hell you will." The words of his enemy filled Laszlo with a surge of new stamina as he was again back fully on his feet and ready for whatever Nyoka had planned for him next. He didn't have to wait long to find out. Nyoka raised his staff and in an instant, both were gone. "Where did they go?" asked a shocked Rose. "I think Nyoka has teleported them both into another dimension to do battle away from here so as to not kill the princesses if his words are to be trusted. You see, each true rune has its own small territory of space and time, Miss Jean once told me. Thus, I suspect they went there." Simeon answered. "How do they get back out?" asked Syra looking over her sister who was finally starting to awake after having passed out. "Laszlo should be able to free himself if he defeats the Sun Rune. Or if Nyoka wins. Well, let's hope he doesn't," answered Simeon as concern filled his ethereal voice. Laszlo looked around the area he was in. It was a white void. It sort of reminded him of the strange place where he had encountered his dead parents after Razi's torture. The only notable difference was the large symbol of the Sun Rune on the ground beneath his feet. Seeing that, he figured out quickly where he was, the true rune's own realm. Nyoka appeared at last. "You like it? This place. It shall make a perfect dwelling for your grave. Keep dreaming, you divine fruitcake," retorted the red bandana wearer. "Like a moth to the flame. So, you two are hasting toward your own demise, boy. Speaking of moths." The bearer of the 3 runes chuckled. The Sun Rune started glowing again. The ancient lord was not channeling an attack, but he was summoning something. Suddenly, Laszlo saw what it was. It was a giant moth-like insect. The creature was glowing like a sun with yellow flames. It was too bright for Laszlo to make out what other colors composed it, save for its white wings. Laszlo reasoned this was the incarnate form of the Sun Rune. The glowing insect dove their warrior, who managed to dodge the attack just in time thanks to the Gale Rune he still had embedded in his right hand. The strange insect flew back up into the air and prepared for another assault. But, before that could happen, Laszlo used the Rune of Punishment to battle Nyoka at his own game. He summoned forth the incarnate form of his own true rune, the Headless Angel. The 2 runic creatures began fighting in midair. They both fired powerful blasts of magic at each other. Great rays of energy went flying everywhere. Both Laszlo and Nyoka had to dodge various attacks as both their incarnated entities duelled. The islander wasn't sure how long this fight would go on, but it did give him what he needed most: time. He still needed more time to recover his body's energy. Nyoka wasn't attacking him either. He figured for the same reason. So, they watched as the two winged incarnations clashed and fought to a draw as both had unleashed one final mega blast on each other. Thus, it was mutually assured destruction. As Laszlo saw both entities disappear, suddenly something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. Nyoka's sun rune started to glow anew. Suddenly, Laszlo was caught in a strange solar sphere. One of its common runic spells, reasoned the islander. He tried to strike at the energy with his sword, but to no avail. He had only taken his eyes off the clone for a moment, and now he was paying for it. He couldn't make such a foolish mistake again, Laszlo told himself. Nyoka has had centuries more experience than himself. If he didn't step up his efforts, he was going to die. So, would Alinda and the others. Not to mention all the people of this country, including Tanya and Desmond. He could feel the solar sphere he was stuck in begin to grow hotter and hotter. He understood the function of the spell. He needed to free himself now, before he got cooked or evaporated by the extreme heat. The ageless warrior raised his left hand as the glyph of the rune of atonement and forgiveness appeared above him. The sphere instantly shattered like glass. This act had not surprised Nyoka. In fact, he had expected it. He merely wanted to test his opponent's mastery of his true rune. Before, in his old vessel, his decaying soul could barely sense any magical forces, even a true rune bearer. However, now that he was fully healed and stronger than ever, he could sense everything again, including this boy's great power and determination, as well as his inexperience. He, may be, older than most humans, but compared to Nyoka, who had lived many centuries, he was just a child. Nevertheless, what happened next did surprise the ancient prince. The islander had not used his true rune to merely break the spell, but he had also summoned his own attack spell concurrently. Laszlo yelled, "Voice of Death!" Nyoka could hear what sounded like wings flapping. He looked up and a small portal of dark green, purple, crimson, and black energy appeared and it began to swirl above his head. As the eerie sound of dozens of things flapping and screeching began to intensify. The noises were coming from the swirling runic power above the clone of Alinda and Syra. The swirling vortex opened up like a giant fisherman's net as dozens of giant bats began to appear. They went right for the female clone. Once again, Nyoka created that same purple shield, which was as powerful as ever thanks to the sun rune that Nyoka now bore in his royal vessel. Nyoka wasn't the only one testing his opponent. Laszlo felt he would be no match against Nyoka in a head-to-head clash of magical skill. However, he still felt that he had the advantage in melee combat. Sure enough, as Laszlo thought, Nyoka used his shield to defeat his spell. And once the bats were gone and Nyoka, still unfazed, lowered his shield, then Laszlo made his move. The sword master snuck around him, using the bats as a distraction for Nyoka's eyes. And as the shield dropped, Laszlo made his move. He thrusted his sword right towards the back of the clone of the woman he loved, hoping to hit her in a vital area. His short blade with its deadly sharpness pierced the vulnerable flesh with ease. Laszlo was aiming for the heart, but as his target moved slightly and suddenly at the last minute the blade went into a lung instead. Nyoka cried out in pain and anger with his female clone's voice as well as his ancient masculine pitch. Laszlo withdrew his blade. Nyoka fell to his knees. Their warrior was just about to finish off his opponent by decapitation, when suddenly he made eye contact with the clone. Its eyes were the same as Alinda's and were in pain. He hesitated for only a moment, and Nyoka made him pay. Using the Twilight rune, he sent a beam of orange light flying at the old hero, striking him right in the chest. Nyoka, standing back up to his feet, while coughing up blood from his mouth into his hand, declared, "You wretched infidel! Did you really think that would be enough to stop me? I will not die by your hands." I am the sun, itself. Eternal. Laszlo watched as Nyoka used the power of the Dawn Rune and Sun Rune to heal his wound. Such a critical attack could have finished off any normal human, even a true rune user like him. Yet, thanks to Nyoka's 3 solar runes, powerful restorative spells were in great supply. However, the healing was not perfect. Nyoka had healed the wound, indeed. But Laszlo could see a scar still on her flesh between the cut pieces of the high priestly garb. Normally, when Laszlo used his rune to heal someone, even the scar would be gone, such as when he healed Rose after that Nethergate attack several months ago. Maybe, a clone's body does not get restored as easily as a real human's, thought Laszlo, as he rose to his feet after recovering from Nyoka's spell. Luckily, his chest guard, which had been retempered by an elvish blacksmith, had absorbed most of the blow. Laszlo reached in his pocket and removed his final mega medicine herb and ate it. He could feel much of his physical strength starting to return. Their warrior knew this was it. This would be the final part of their fight, and he was now more determined than ever to win. Nyoka screamed in his dual voice, "Did you hear me, infidel? I am the sun, itself. I command all 3 solar runes. You are nothing compared to me." Laszlo retorted, "It does not matter. Who cares? I am done being afraid. I will not let you win. 3 runes or 100, I will defeat you." The same courage he found before at the start of this fight filled him once more. He again not only accepted his fate, he embraced it. In truth, Nyoka had done him a favor. He could fight here in this runic dimension to his heart's content without having to worry about his friends getting hurt. "All right, you parasite. You think you're so divine. Let's see how you do against this," declared Laszlo. He now dug down deeper into his soul than he had ever done before and fired a magical crimson-red beam of true rune fury at Nyoka. This attack took the twisted old soul totally by surprise for a moment. He created a beam of his own to counter Laszlo's. However, Laszlo's blast was stronger and was pushing back on Nyoka's own attack. Nyoka channeled all the power of the Sun Rune that his new cloned doppelganger could handle, and the 2 opponents' spells were again unleashing all kinds of devastating force and power. Yet, both beams were now equal in supremacy. As before in the king's chamber, but now greater, relentless swirls of wind and power were dancing all around the bear. Streaks of red and purple lightning were flying off of Laszlo's blast, while something like plasma and solar flares were pulsating off of Nyoka's attack. The loud chaos being generated by the clashing of true runic energy reminded the old sailor of a time at sea when he got stuck in a giant hurricane. The wind, rain, and lightning were all swirling around him. And there had been an uncertainty in his mind, if he would live or die. The new goddess, however, roared with rage, "Fool, did you forget? I command not 1, but 3 powerful runes." The Dawn and Twilight runes both started glowing in addition to the Sun Rune on his forehead. Laszlo's runic attack of Crimson was now on the retreat as the intensity of the runic trio was overwhelming his single true rune. Laszlo grit his teeth as his spell was about to be besieged. He tried summoning more power, but there was no more. He was giving it all he had. There was nothing left in him to summon. He had tried his best, but it wasn't enough. Nyoka and his 3 solar runes were greater than Laszlo and his 1 rune. That's when the most unusual thing started to happen. Without warning, he felt a familiar presence appeared momentarily behind him. Could it be? Was it Leknat? Now out of nowhere, people seemed to be materializing around him. They were the same people from his dream a few days prior. He saw his friends like Snow, Dal, Paula, Jewel and Flare. He saw Kika and her pirate crew. Plus, he saw Ted, Maxine, and Warlock. Even a younger Desmond and Danya. Most importantly of all, he saw his father, Lino, once more as well. They were all joined by dozens and dozens more until there were 107 of them in all. Laszlo, himself, was the 108th person standing in their midst. Quickly, All of the words of encouragement they had told him in that earlier dream came flooding back to his mind. This great cloud of witnesses had arrived just when he needed them the most. In that moment, he could feel them more, and they were as real as he was. The spirit of the 108 stars of destiny was once again gathered and resting upon Laszlo. This new wave of power came swirling upon Laszlo like a volcano exploding. His once receding beam from the weight of the 3 solar runes was again regaining momentum. His reinvigorated blast forced another stalemate in their runic clash. Nyoka was in a panic. "Where did you get this kind of power? You have only 1 rune. I have 3. How are you doing this? Stop it. I am a god. I command you to stop." Laszlo declared, "You may have 3 powerful runes and legions of slaves somewhere waiting to serve you, but I have something you will never have, Nyoka. I have friends. No, more than friends, I have family. And they are here, right now, helping me to defeat you." A smile came over the master of the rune of punishment. "As I told you before, my true rune lets me judge men and gods alike. And as I said, your judgment has already been rendered. Your sentence is death. Now, die." Laszlo held nothing back, and neither did the spirit of the 108 stars of destiny that was helping him. "You damn boy. I have existed for centuries. The Sindarians tried and failed to kill me, as did my own father. They all tried. And all failed. I cannot be extinguished. My soul is forever. I am forever. I am the sun." Nyoka cried out. However, he could feel the royal vessel beginning to become overwhelmed by too much power. It was more than the artificial female form could handle. Suddenly, there was a great explosion as both true rune bearers went flying backwards from the shockwave from the colossal blast. Laszlo felt everything going dark around him. Right before he totally faded away, he could have sworn he heard a familiar song from his mother's music box starting to play in the recesses of his mind. Back in the temple hidden in the depths of the mountain located at the geographic center of Falena, Ush and Simeon could feel the titans of power clashing once more, even though they couldn't see the duel. Syra could sort of sense something, but not as clearly as the 2 others could. "What's happening?" Rose kept asking, unsure of who was winning the fight. Alinda was fully awake again and was just about to ask a question, when there was a sudden flash of blinding light. This was followed by a popping sound as both true rune bearers fell to the ground, unmoving. The younger princess yelled the ageless warrior's name as the 5 ran immediately toward Laszlo's body. He was unconscious, but alive, barely. Action had to be taken or he would die. Simeon casted his flowing runes healing spell, while Ush used a revive spell from her resurrection rune. They were small spells, but they used up all that was left of the 2 wizards' power. Both were severely drained and exhausted still. But it was enough. Laszlo was starting to rouse. Alinda embraced Laszlo warmly. He couldn't hug her back though, as his whole body was still too weak to do anything but breathe. He did, however, manage a meager smile upon seeing his favorite pair of blue eyes once again. Simeon walked over to the unresponsive vessel of Nyoka. She was dead and not breathing anymore. Rose and Ush approached the lifeless vessel to see for themselves as well. "Is it really over?" Rose asked skeptically. "I don't feel any more dark power coming from this vessel. Perhaps his soul was finally destroyed and is now at rest in the great beyond," Simeon speculated. Ush replied, "All Ush senses coming from this vessel is emptiness. In addition, the 3 solar runes feel like they are now sleeping to Ush." Sadly, however, Rose's skepticism proved uncanny. As another rip in the dimensions of space and time occurred, and a familiar ominous black mist descended with pure rage. "No way. Impossible," moaned a weakened Laszlo, who was still unable to move his body. The black void took a more human form, like a silhouette complete with legs and arms, but it was still incorporeal. Moreover, he declared in his own old dark voice, "I told thou. I art a god. I cannot be killed. I am eternal. This curse be damned. My plans be damned. This world be damned." Sun Rune, give me thy power for one final attack. Use the same power my father once used to burn this entire land to ash. Do it, again. Cleanse this country with thy flames of divine wrath. The great weapon that is the Sun Rune, for whatever reason, seemed to agree with Nyoka's final request from it. It turned the female clone vessel to ash instantly and started glowing anew with power. And now with no will to control it. The Sun Rune lifted into the air next to where Nyoka's soul was floating. It started glowing with more power. The same destructive sphere as before appeared. It was a mini-sun that looked ready to go supernova and destroy this whole country once again. Everyone looked toward Laszlo, but he was still as helpless as the rest of them. Alinda looked at him, then at Nyoka, and then at the Sun's rune's ball of exploding fury. That's when something blue twinkling caught her eye. She looked down at where the clone's body had been. There on the ground glowing dimly was her Dawn rune. The other rune was there as well, glowing orange. Out of nowhere, she remembered the old druid dressed in black as her words came flooding back to Alinda, "You must be worthy of the Dawn rune." Likewise, Syra caught a glimpse of her Twilight rune. She, too, remembered what she was told by the old caretaker, which was that these twin runes give balance and direction to the Sun rune's awesome power. The sisters looked at each other and nodded as both had the same idea. They each extended their proper arm and the twin runes immediately responded to their summons. Alinda swirled with blue energy as she came into possession of the Dawn rune in her right hand once more. Syra, likewise, regained the Twilight rune in her left hand as rays of orange power swirled around her too. They both held each other's free hand and raised their rune hands high in the air. Both symbols of the twin solar runes appeared above them. Nyoka's spirit saw this and tried to attack them with what little power he had left. Though, he couldn't stop the sisters nor their powerful runes. His spell was easily deflected and was fizzled away by the power emanating from the two sisters. The mindless Sun rune started resonating in harmony with the twin runes, as though it were now obeying them. The deadly spell that would have destroyed the nation began to, also, fizzle away and went back into the Sun rune. Nyoka's spirit was too incorporeal and too weak to do anything to prevent this. He roared, floating there, helplessly, "You whorish wenches! I took your blood once. I shall take it again, once I get a new vessel. I swear it." This thought, rather threat, didn't settle well with either sibling, who both had a new idea. Their runes still shimmering with power and control over the Sun rune gave the true rune a new order. Thus, a moment later the Sun rune was again generating power and Nyoka's spirit was trapped in a sphere of pure flames. The blazing bubble rendered his wretched soul mute. They could see him yelling, but the sphere cancelled out the verbal noise much to their delight. In an instant, the bubble disappeared as did all its contents. Nyoka was finally defeated at last. Dead. Gone. Forever. The sisters hugged each other in joy. Soon everyone was embracing and celebrating. Urge was even crying a bit. Because her horrible ordeal that was her brother was at last over after so many centuries. Next, Alinda used the healing powers of her Dawn rune to restore Laszlo enough to allow his body to walk. Meanwhile, Syra used her rune's power to smash through the debris and large broken marble blocking the door. Ursh informed the girls that normally the twin runes had to be in the same body to summon the Sun rune to one's self. But as long as they both had the same thought and desire, the true rune should be willing to return to the first queen's statue in the Sun Palace, as it was the rune's preferred location. Sure enough, the true rune obeyed the shared command from the royal sisters. It took off like a shooting star for Solfalena. The old temple room could not handle any more. The right half of the room started to collapse as well. The group quickly got out of the king's chamber with just enough time to watch that part of the building crumple onto itself. They all were safe and alive. They slowly made their way back up to the surface and finally to the top of the big hole about 2 tiresome hours later. By this point, Simeon had recovered enough of his own energy. Raising his rod, the hole began to seal itself once more. Rose jumped and grabbed her weapons. "I hear something coming," she yelled. Alinda trembled a bit, You don't think it is Nyoka, do you? No, said Laszlo, he is gone. But, someone is coming. There are several of them. And they are strong. Very strong. They all drew their weapons and waited. They watched as many figures started to appear riding out from a grove of trees. It was Godwin and Robert on horseback with several dozen soldiers behind them. In addition, several elvish archers along with Findus, Aeolus, and Ren accompanied them. Lastly, Jean and the Oracle of Lunas brought up the rear guard. The six were overjoyed to see so many of their friends and loved ones. Syra raced for Marcus, who quickly unmounted his horse and hugged his wife. It was one of the few times in his life he had expressed a real moment of public happiness. Laszlo was greeted by his three elf friends. Alinda hugged her uncle Ishan, warmly. Jean and the other two wizards smiled at each other kindly. Rose, not wanting to feel left out, leapt up in Robert's tall body. He caught her small form in his arms. She kissed him on the lips for several moments, saying afterwards, that we redheads are a very passionate people. We often do several things on sheer impulse. For once the gruff Queen's knight was speechless and slightly embarrassed by the whole thing. Especially, with his men standing nearby them, hooting and cheering him on. Godwin explained that after the Sun Rune had suddenly vanished from the palace without warning, they gathered a small party of warriors to come searching for it and everyone else. Miss Jean and the elves had led them here. They followed the trail of magic the Sun Rune left behind in its wake. Several of the soldiers voluntarily gave up their horses for the royal family members and their companions while they simply walked back to the palace. The six were so tired, they couldn't refuse such a wonderful offer. Some time later, they arrived at the entrance to Sulfalena. The elves, however, stopped at the gate and did not enter. Ren told Laszlo they would not be going back into the human city again. They had only stuck around this long, because they wanted to ensure that Laszlo was safe and that evil threatening their homeland was gone for good. So, they said their goodbyes. While Laszlo was talking with them, Alinda looked up and could see the Sun Rune dazzling brightly in the palace tower once more. So, the true rune had obeyed them, indeed, thought Alinda, as she looked down at the Dawn Rune in her hand. Her uncle rode up beside her saying, "You'll have to give that back, you know. You can't keep it." "I know, I only borrowed its power to save Syra. I have no more plans of using any more magic. I have seen a lifetime's worth of runes today. I am finished," the young princess said happily. Ishan smiled. Yet, Alinda noticed there was a deep concern in his eyes. "What is it, uncle?" "Nothing, my dear. Nothing. Look, tomorrow morning after you have rested, had some food, and return that Dawn Rune. Your mother has asked that you, Rose, and Laszlo meet her and your father in the throne room." "Uncle, why?" she asked. But he said nothing else. He simply rode off into the city with a deep and solemn look on his face. A new wave of concern came over the younger princess about what awaited her within these walls tomorrow.